Hi, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. I am your co-host, Rowell, alongside with Francois Verges. How are you doing, Francois?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Glad to record another episode. This time we're going to get a little bit technical and get into 802.11ax a bit and specifically talk about multiple BSSID. What do you think about that?
It's good. That's something we may see more and more, especially with 6 gigahertz. So it's nice to kind of take a look at it and see what it looks like in the frames.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we should start off by talking about what multiple BSSID is, what it solves, and also it can be referred to as multi-BSSID. So it's got some other names it goes by. But so if you imagine that you've got multiple SSIDs configured in your environment, and or you've been to have you been to a WeWork, Francois? Have you ever stepped
Yeah.
inside a WeWork? Um, for some reason they give everybody their own SSIDs, right? So you'll see more than 16 SSIDs, and when you
hmm
have that many SSIDs, you've got a lot of overhead, a lot of beacon overhead, right? All those
hmm
SSIDs being broadcasted, all these different devices trying to find these SSIDs. So there's all these probe responses, and we've seen different presentations in the past about beacon overhead and trying to limit the number of SSIDs you're broadcasting, right?
hmm
Yeah, so each SSID's got broadcast a beacon, and that takes up a lot of the airtime. So it's inefficient. You have less throughput, right? And what multiple BSSID does is it will co-locate all these SSIDs into a single beacon or probe response frame, right? So instead of seeing the 16 separate beacons that are
hmm
broadcasted at this WeWork environment, it would just condense it down into one beacon. What do you think about that feature?
Yeah. Yeah. If you think about the beacons, all of the beacons are coming from the same access point, are broadcasted on the same channel roughly at the same time. So the AP is aware of all of the SSIDs or configured on itself. So it can totally can aggregate all of those BSSIDs information into one frame and sending instead of sending one individual frame for each BSS, it can just send one beacon frame to advertise all the BSS that it supports. So it makes sense. It saves a little bit of overhead, um, and it's also used. We'll talk about it, but it's also used in 6 gigahertz to help us understand, where these BSSIDs are being supported.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that this feature or this multiple BSSID was placed into 802.11v
hmm
2011. So it's been around for a while, but for some reason none of the vendors were using it, none of the devices supported it, and so therefore we didn't use it. We've had plenty of time to implement this, and now about 10 years later, we're starting to see this as a mandatory feature that needs to be supported in Wi-Fi 6 and later. So we do see this
Yeah,
in AX and 6 gigahertz.
that's the way it usually is, right? It has to become mandatory for people to start using it.
Yeah,
Um,
so
but
we won't go ahead, Francois.
No, I was going to say the way the feature is implemented is by adding a couple of information elements into the beacon frame or the probe response.
Yeah.
So we call it a feature, but if you look at it, it's more a couple of information elements that are added, and um, that's how you can detect if the feature is supported or used by your access point.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are two types of multiple BSSIDs. And if you're listening to this episode, we do have this in video because we're going to share the Wireshark and actually look at SSIDs that I'm currently broadcasting here in my lab. But they're the two types of multiple BSSID. One is called the transmitted multiple BSSID, and then you have your non-transmitted BSSIDs. So we'll kind of dive into that with Wireshark. So I do have a capture, And if you head over to our show notes, I believe this is episode 306, go to cleartosend.net/306. I will include a link to a packet capture that includes one beacon frame, and you could actually see multiple BSSID there. So if I share my screen, what we have here is the one beacon frame from my I captured this from a Cisco access point that was broadcasting also 6 gigahertz. So if we look at this beacon frame here on this left side, I have a column that shows SSIDs, and you could actually see there's more than one SSID there in that column, which we're not used to seeing, right? Usually it's just one SSID in the beacon frame. But if we go to the right side here, and I actually expanded everything, but I'm going to just expand a few things, right? So first, this looks normal, right? We see, all right, I have a SSID called testnet, and that's what's being broadcasted here, right? But what you will now notice is that there's this multiple BSSID here, and also an extension tag there for another multiple BSSID configuration. So why don't we expand one of these here? You can see the tag number 71. And this here, max BSSID indicator, shows that there are actually 4 SSIDs, right? This first one up here at the top is the first SSID. This is what's called the transmitted BSSID. So this beacon frame looks like testnet, but really these sub-elements here of non-transmitted BSSID profiles, that's what contains the other SSIDs that are being broadcasted. So in this capture, there's only one beacon frame instead of seeing 4 beacon frames, right? So that's already a big improvement as far as airtime goes. So I'll expand these.
So if I kind of summarize your setup, you tell me if I'm wrong, but you have an access point and you've configured a few SSIDs on 6 gigahertz, and then you captured one beacon frame. And if you look at the beacon frame, we can see that the AP used the BSS that corresponds to the testnet SSID to send out that beacon frame. And inside that beacon frame, we have an additional information element, which is called multiple BSSID, in which we can actually see the other SSID supported by that AP.
Yep, that's correct. And within that multiple BSSID information element are these 3 different profiles here. Now, these profiles correlate to the other SSIDs that I've configured. So once you expand those, you could see that the SSID name, it still has the same information as if it was its own beacon, because the devices that need to join that SSID, they need that information, right? Like what is the BSSID security, right? So we can actually dive into some of those. So looking at this one, I have one called frame thrower. So if you expand, like it looks just like as if it was its own beacon frame. And it does have this multiple BSSID index. So that's the index there. You can see all of this other information, and especially the security information, right? So here you can see what security is actually supported. So that way the devices that try to connect to this SSID will be able to see if it matches, right? And so the same with the other SSID. You see this SSID name here.
I think the index is important because you could also have a hidden SSID. So if you have a hidden SSID, you cannot identify the SSID by its name. So that's why they also have the index. So you can also identify the BSS by another, like a number, pretty much. And I think in the standard they define how this index is calculated. Yeah. So maybe we'll link some of the sections that talks about that in the standards.
Yeah, reading the standard on this is kind of interesting, and trying to decipher it, like we've always mentioned in the past, is sometimes hard to understand, right? You have a way to interpret this, and every vendor sometimes, most of the time, interprets it differently, right? So you can see on the left, I'm using channel 37. It's a 6 gigahertz channel. You could see that management frame protection is required, it's capable. So that's kind of the look of it from a Wireshark perspective. Now, what if you don't have a capture, right? So I'm gonna minimize that. What I did is if you download the capture, you could actually drag it into Wi-Fi Explorer, and it's a little bit easier to understand, right? So I dragged it in here. You can see only one beacon frame. It says testnet here. You can see the security type, the vendor, and the channel. But if we actually scroll down, and I don't know if I can, I can't change the size of this, but right, where's it? All right, here. I don't know if you can see that there is a multiple BSSID information element. And it's just like Wireshark. If you expand that, you can see the element ID and the sub-elements, which contain the non-transmitted BSSID profiles. If you expand that, you could then see the SSID name and also the element ID. So same thing within Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. You should be able to open that up, do the scan, and be able to see the multiple BSSID.
And talking about that, I think on Windows, I think Wi-Fi is back.
Oh yeah,
So maybe you can try to do the same thing, drop the PCAP in Wi-Fi and get access to the information element that way as well.
yeah. I think being able to see this will and
Hmm.
understand why you only see one beacon frame that contains the one SSID is important as we transition to AX and Wi-Fi 6E, because
Hmm.
for troubleshooting, you might be looking at a network scanner and being like, I don't see the SSID I'm supposed to be seeing, but you may
Hmm.
notice that it's a multiple BSSID, right? And so, go ahead before I move on to the next screen
I was
sharing.
gonna say I wonder how we're gonna configure our columns in Wireshark if we cannot see the additional SSIDs. I guess we'll have to be creative around
Yep.
seeing the SSIDs.
Well, in Wireshark, I had the SSID column, and it did show all four in that
Oh,
single
okay.
column.
So okay, I guess we don't have to worry about it then.
But I think we need something that stands out that says, "Hey, this is a multiple BSSID. There's more than one SSID
Hmm.
here." As we transition. All right, so I wanted to just kind of show you how I captured the frame. Right, I do have an Etherscope NXG with 6 gigahertz capability. And right here, I'm just showing that I'm scanning on the 6 gigahertz Uni 5. I'm not scanning all of the channels. I don't need to. There's nobody else on these channels except for me. You can see one AP. It's kind of hard to see. One AP is right there. There is a little bit of 802.11 traffic. But what I wanted to really dive into is if we look at what SSIDs are being broadcasted, you see four of them, right? So if we actually click into one of them, I can see it's 802.11ax, has a security type of OWE. Then if I tap on BSSIDs, uh, this icon right here is the one that that what NetAlly is trying to tell you is this icon means it's a multiple BSSID. It's a transmitted BSSID. So if I click on these here and go to BSSIDs to list them all, you can actually see the difference in the icons, right? I don't know if you can see that, Francois. You see like two solid lines and then the Wi-Fi signal.
Hmm.
And then for the
Yeah.
other BSSIDs, it's a dotted line, two dotted lines, and the Wi-Fi signal, right? So these other two here, that icon means it's the non-transmitted BSSID. So NetAlly's done a good job to tell you when you're looking at these SSIDs, going, oh look, this is a multiple BSSID. This one is a non-transmitted BSSID. So now I can actually go into here, tap the BSSID, and as I'm looking at that BSSID, here's the SSID name, and then right above it, it does say multi-BSSID non-transmitted, right? But if you're trying to figure out, all right, what other SSIDs are being transmitted here, as I'm looking at this SSID, there's another section down here called multi-BSSIDs. So you can see what's associated with that by tapping on it. And these are the 3 SSIDs that are also being transmitted within multiple BSSID, right? You've got your transmitted BSSID at the top and then the non-transmitted ones at the bottom. So I thought that was really cool of NetAlly to do. And that's how I was able to do the capture, right? I was scanning on that channel. And so if you go to the channel right here, there's
The
3
5E channel.
BSSIDs. Yep.
Yeah.
And then I was able to click on this wrench and then do a capture. And that's how I was able to view it in Wireshark and also import that into Wi-Fi Explorer.
So it's nice. Now that you know what transmitted and non-transmitted means, now you can decipher what the tool is telling you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And just so you guys know what we're dealing with, how we're able to configure this, I do have an ingenious 6 gigahertz AP. You can see that these are the SSIDs that are configured. I tried to throw in a 4th SSID before we recorded this because I wanted it to match with the PCAP file. And I just happen to have this AP plugged in. So you can see I have these SSIDs configured with the different security types. And I just wanted to see those displayed differently within Wireshark. So that's how we were able to configure them. And I think one thing we should talk about too is which SSID is selected to be the transmitted SSID, right? I can see people saying, well, I want this SSID to be my transmitted SSID. So that way when I see it, I know that it's the transmitted SSID. With Cisco, it was the first SSID I created. It just decided that was the transmitted SSID. With Ingenious, I don't know how they select it because when I was changing settings with different SSIDs, it decided upon this SSID to be the transmitted SSID.
So like the 3rd one, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure why it decided to do that because it was, I mean, it's not a big deal to me that which one is selected, but you can see here it is the 3rd one because of the SSID name. So it's just something to note. I don't know if I don't think in the standard, does it tell you? I don't recall reading anything that says this is how you select the transmitted BSSID. There must be a way, or the vendors just decide how they want to do it differently.
Yeah, I guess you won't see the MAC address unless you start generating traffic. But in the standard, they talk about the MAC address. So maybe it's based on the MAC address and how Ingenious is generating these BSSIDs MAC address.
Yeah, so we can look at maybe even the BSSID, right? 773C. If we go back one,
it's B. It's
yeah,
773B.
It's the lowest one, so maybe that's how it decided.
Yeah, that would make sense to me.
Yeah, and I wonder what happens to if you disable that SSID. Does that mean testnet takes over? I guess I can try that.
Just remove it now, live. Yeah,
we'll do it live.
Just delete it altogether.
Just delete it. All right, we can do that. It's a lab. There's no clients. So I have no clients right now connected to any of this. All right, so we'll go to SSID. I'll select. It was this one right here, right? Slurpfish. Delete that. Okay, it's gone. Right?
Okay, well, while it's kind of resetting, one thing we haven't talked about as well is the size of the beacon, because obviously the size of the beacon is bigger. And if you go back to your Wireshark, I think you can see the size of the beacon frame. It's 500 and something bytes. If you go all the way to the 543 bytes. So here we can see it, beacons, it's usually between 350, 450, I would say, bytes, depending on how you configure your SSID. So here we can see that it added roughly 100, 150 bytes. And if you actually go to the multiple BSSID information element, it will tell you the size. In your case, I think it's 156.
Let me collapse them and
Yeah,
then expand it.
yeah, the multiple BSSID, yeah, 156. So you can see it's adding maybe like 30, close to 30% of the size of the beacon. So it's like a super beacon, but then it it allows you to save another 3 in our case here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so roughly 50 bytes per SSID. That's what we can see here.
Yeah. Now, we're not advocating that you should, you got 16 SSIDs now, just put them all into the into multiple BSSID. We actually don't know what what it does putting that many SSIDs. Like, will you see a benefit there? Um, I don't have enough clients in my environment or enough traffic to generate enough overhead with all the individual beacon frames to compare it to just a single beacon. So I think that's one thing I'll take notice of as I transition networks from AC to AX and trying to figure out if we do see a benefit of multiple
Mhm.
BSSID. So in theory, we should, right? Should be better airtime, better airtime efficiency, but will we see it in the real world? Hopefully.
Well, you could see it if you have a lot of APs, transmitting on the same channels. Um, so if you have like CCI, or if you have a lot of clients asking for probes, because I'm guessing it will be the same thing for probes, right? So you'll get one probe response with everything.
Yeah.
Um,
All right.
so maybe in very high density environment.
All right. So I see now that that SSID is gone. Now there's
Hmm.
only two showing. Oh, so now testnet is it did pick the lowest MAC address. So that was probably the case with Cisco too. I probably created them out of order and it just picked the lowest MAC address. So that's what we should expect to see. I guess if we test other APs, we should be able to validate that.
Hmm.
All right, so I'll have a link to the PCAP file if you want to take a look at that. Um, be sure to watch the video if you want to see the examples as we use Wireshark to look at the information elements using the Etherscope to take a look at multi-BSSID and also importing that PCAP file into Wireshark and seeing it there as well. If you've got an AX network, you should be able to see that in not Wireshark, but in Wi-Fi Explorer, you'll see the information element multiple BSSID.
I wonder if it's something we can see on 5 gigahertz.
It should be. So just so you guys know, we did try to do that in this lab, and I don't know if it's just my Wi-Fi Explorer wasn't showing it. So initially we had all the SSIDs under 6 gigahertz only, and so we weren't. Obviously, my laptop doesn't support 6 gigahertz, so we weren't seeing it. So we enabled 5 gigahertz, but we are not seeing the information element. So if I show you, I'm not even seeing the other SSIDs
Are you scanning? Are you filtering for something right now?
for the Ingenious AP. So even if I did
Okay.
5,
So you're only seeing one beacon frame
oh
coming
no,
out of that
it's right
AP?
there. No, there's 2. It actually doesn't pick it up as Ingenious. All right, so if we look at, so we saw that testnet was the one that became the multiple or the transmitted BSSID, but I don't see a multiple BSSID
On
information
5 gigahertz.
element. Yeah.
So it looks like it's very 6 gigahertz specific at the moment.
Yeah, even though it is uh, it is specified for Wi-Fi
AX.
6. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it is just for 6 gigahertz at the moment. Maybe I was incorrect in saying it's mandatory in Wi-Fi 6. Maybe it's just 6 gigahertz.
I guess we'll see how everyone is implementing it. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I don't have enough 6 gigahertz APs to really see or different. I think I do have a Meraki AX AP, so I can turn that on. I can turn on my Cisco AP again, but then I just deleted my controller, so I need to recreate it. Um, it's too much work involved there, but I'll turn on my Meraki AP and see if the multiple BSSID shows up there, just to see the consistency between vendors and to determine if it is only mandatory in Wi-Fi 6E.
Hmm.
All right,
Awesome.
so that's kind of neat. Something new to look out for when you're going to be troubleshooting or observing your Wi-Fi networks, and hopefully we can learn more from this. If you guys have anything you want to add, something that we missed, be sure to hit us up on the show notes, clearsend.net/306. Discuss it a little bit further. But so far, that's just me playing around with the Etherscope. I saw multiple BSSID, and actually James was the one from NetAlly to show me the little icons and the difference between the icons. So I thought that was cool. All right. Thank you guys for watching or listening, wherever you're streaming or playing this from. And we will see you in the next episode. Thanks, guys.
See you guys. Bye bye.